Whenever I heard happy birthday to you, my body would start trembling. On my birthday, my own brothers would gift me one punch for each year of my life. At 15, I begged not to have a party. They broke my arm anyway. Oh, my dear friends, what a joy to be here talking with you today. My name is Ethel Johnson, and I'm 72 years young. Thank the Lord. I was born in Appalachia, in the hills of eastern Kentucky, but today I live here in Maplewood, Minnesota. It's a blessed place, surrounded by beautiful lakes, with such welcoming folks that make me feel right at home, even though I'm so far from where I was born. These days, I spend my time making quilts and doing needlepoint, an art I learned late in life. Would you believe? I even have a little booth at the town farmers market where I sell my pieces every Thursday and Sunday. I started after I retired from the school where I worked as a cafeteria lady for over 30 years. My neighbor Irene taught me, may she rest in peace. She had magical hands and said I had a knack for it too. At first, I just mended clothes, you know? Then I took a real liking to it, and now I make tablecloths so pretty they look like paintings. I'm sitting here on my porch swing that my son-in-law Robert fixed up for me, watching the lake at the end of the street. Evening's coming on, and this orange sky reflecting on the water is a blessing I give thanks for every day. My cat Romeo is here at my feet, purring like he understands every word I'm saying to you. And you, my dears, watching me now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this chatty grandma? Is it early morning with a cup of coffee, or maybe lunchtime, or perhaps evening while you're resting? I read all the comments, you know. It brings me such joy to know where you're from and when you take time to listen to an old woman's stories. Let me know, all right? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I wanted to share a story I've kept in my heart for many years. It's never been easy to talk about, but now, at this age, I understand that sharing our pain can be a way to help others. It's about birthdays. Ah, birthdays. They should be days of joy, shouldn't they? For many people they are, but for me, for a very long time, my birthday was the day I feared most all year long. Have you ever thought about how certain memories get branded into us like hot iron marks cattle? Especially those from our childhood? Well, that's what I'm going to tell you about. About how my brothers turned what should have been a day of celebration into a day that, well, a day I wished I could forget. And how, after much suffering, I managed to transform this story. But before I talk about the hard times, let me go back a bit and tell you how it all began in the hills of Kentucky, where I was born on a hot January day. I was born in a small mining town in eastern Kentucky on January 15th, 1953, in a simple wooden house in the Riverside neighborhood. My father, Theodore Johnson, worked in the coal mines, and my mother, Cecilia, took in washing for the wealthy families in town. We were a big family, which was common in those days. I was the youngest of 6 children, the only girl after 5 boys. Our house sat on a hillside, and getting there was a climb that turned slippery as soap when it rained. It had 3 rooms, the living room that doubled as a kitchen, with a wood stove that stayed lit all day, my parents' bedroom, and the small room where we children all slept together, the boys on mats on the floor and me on a makeshift bed built from wooden crates. The bathroom? Oh, it was an outhouse in the yard, one of those pit toilets that we were terrified to use at night. The yard was big, with a blackberry bush, a cherry tree, and lots of parsley and chives that my mother planted. We also had some chickens that scratched around all day, and an old dog named Speedy, who was anything but fast. He spent most of his time sleeping under the maple tree. My father, Theodore, was a quiet man. He left before sunrise and returned after dark, always with that white coal dust stuck to his dark skin. He spoke little and smiled even less. But he wasn't one to hit us. His way of punishing was with silence. He would go days without speaking to whoever had done something wrong. And that hurt more than any slap. My mother, Cecilia, was different. A strong woman with hands calloused from scrubbing clothes on a washboard, but with a heart as soft as fresh bread. She would hum while she worked, pray aloud morning and night, and always had a God bless you, ready on her tongue. It was from her that I learned my first prayers, sitting on the packed dirt floor of the kitchen. My brothers. Ah, my brothers. The oldest was George, who was already 20 when I was born. Then came Oliver, 17, Albert, 15, Eugene, 10, and Gerald, 8. Between Gerald and me, my mother had 2 babies who were stillborn. She said I was her miracle, the daughter she had prayed to the Lord for. The problem was that for my brothers, especially the 3 oldest ones, I wasn't a miracle at all. I was the intruder, the one who came to steal what little attention was left from our parents. George and Oliver were already working with my father in the mines. Albert helped an uncle at a store in town. Only Eugene and Gerald were still in school, but they already did odd jobs here and there. My childhood until age 5 is a blurry memory of playing alone in the yard, making mud pies, or accompanying my mother to the creek while she washed clothes. The other neighborhood children didn't come to our house much because they were afraid of my brothers, who were always getting into trouble. Life in that Kentucky town in those days was hard for poor folks. The town survived on what was left of the coal mining boom, but for people like us, only hard work remained. I remember the mule trains passing by with their loaded animals, the smell of cornbread coming from windows, the church bell that marked the hours. I started school at 7 at Lincoln Elementary. I walked there, up and down the hill, with a tin lunchbox that almost always just had a piece of cornbread in it. I liked studying, learning my letters, doing math. The teacher, Miss Eleanor, had a special fondness for me, perhaps sensing that things at home weren't easy. It was around that time that I realized something strange happened on my birthday. The first one I remember celebrating, when I turned 6, my mother made a simple cornbread cake without frosting or anything. But to me, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. They sang happy birthday. I blew out the candle, just one, and then my mother cut the cake into small pieces to give to everyone. When night came and my parents were already in bed, George, Oliver, and Albert called me out to the yard. I remember it being dark, with only the moonlight illuminating the ground. "Come here, birthday girl," said George with a smile that scared me. "Now we're going to give you your real present." They made me stand still with my arms behind my back. Then George said, "Everyone gets a present on their birthday. Yours is going to be special. You turned 6, so you're going to get 6 presents." Before I could understand, I felt the first punch in my stomach. I fell down, breathless, eyes wide, not understanding what was happening. George lifted me by the arm and said, "That was the first one, 5 more to go." Oliver delivered the second, to my leg, Albert, the third, to my back. And so they continued, taking turns, while I cried quietly, afraid of waking my parents and making things worse. At the end, George held my face between his fingers and said close to my ear, "Every year it's going to be like this, 1 punch for each year. And if you tell anyone, it's going to be much worse. Understand, little princess?" I went back to bed, trembling, my body aching, not understanding why my own brothers hated me so much. Eugene and Gerald, the younger ones, watched it all in silence, somewhat frightened, but without the courage to stand up to the older ones. The next day, when my mother noticed the bruises, I said I had fallen from the neighbor's apple tree. She believed me, or pretended to. She put on a homemade herbal salve and kissed my forehead. "You need to be more careful, my flower," she said. "Little girls shouldn't be climbing trees." And so, what should have been just a happy memory of my first birthday celebration became the beginning of a nightmare that would repeat year after year. A nightmare I didn't understand, but carried in silence, because the fear that something worse might happen was greater than the pain of the punches I received. And that's how the date that should have been the happiest of the year became the one I feared most on the calendar. With each January that approached, my heart would already start to tighten, thinking about what was to come. After that first birthday, life continued its course in Kentucky, but something inside me had changed forever. The happy girl who ran around the yard now carried an invisible weight, a fear that grew as January approached. When I turned 7, I tried to pretend I'd forgotten my own birthday. I didn't say anything at home, didn't ask for cake or a party, but my mother, bless her big heart, insisted on remembering. She prepared a sweet corn pudding in the morning and said, "Happy birthday, my little wildflower. Today you're becoming a young lady." I spent the day at school with a knot in my throat, knowing what awaited me at home. Miss Eleanor even asked what was wrong when she saw me crying at recess, hiding behind the apple tree in the schoolyard. I said I had a stomachache. It wasn't a complete lie. My stomach was churning just thinking about what was coming. When I returned from school, my mother had made a small potato cake. They sang happy birthday, but I could barely smile. My father even gave me a present, a rag doll my mother had sewn in secret. It was the first real doll I'd ever received. I hugged it tight, as if it could protect me. That night, I waited awake, trembling under the thin blanket. Around 10 o'clock, when the house was silent, I heard footsteps. George opened the bedroom door and signaled for me to follow. I thought about screaming, about hiding under the bed, but the fear was greater. I followed my 3 older brothers into the yard, still clutching my new doll. 7 years today, isn't that right, little princess? George had that same wicked smile. You know the rules, right? 1 present for each year. I closed my eyes when I saw his fist rise. The first punch hit my shoulder. I fell to the ground, the doll flying from my hands. The second was from Oliver to my back. The third, from Albert to my leg. They took turns, as if it were a game, counting loudly. 4, 5, 6. On the 7th blow, I couldn't take it and screamed. George covered my mouth forcefully and whispered in my ear, "If anyone wakes up, you'll get double next year." When it was over, Oliver threw my new doll in the mud and stepped on it. This is for you to learn that the place for a spoiled little princess is in the dirt. I returned to bed hurt and humiliated, hugging the dirty doll, crying silently. That night, I swore that next year I would run away before my birthday. But where could a 7-year-old girl go? The months passed. At school, I excelled in my studies, as if learning was my only way out of that life. At home, I avoided being alone with my older brothers. I began to grow closer to Eugene and Gerald, who never participated in the beatings, but also never defended me. One afternoon, shortly after turning 8 and receiving my 8 birthday presents, I was returning from school when Albert stopped me on the path. We were alone on the trail that led up to our house. "Why don't you cry anymore when you get hit?" he asked, seeming intrigued. "I cry later," I answered honestly, "when nobody's watching." He looked at me strangely. I thought he was going to hit me right there, but he just shook his head and said, "George said this year you didn't even scream. You're getting strong." It wasn't strength, it was fear. I had learned that the less I reacted, the quicker it ended. The punches came anyway, so I just closed my eyes and waited for it to be over, counting mentally up to my age. When I turned 9 in January 1962, something happened that changed the dynamics at home a bit. My mother was pregnant again, already in her 40s. Everyone said it was risky, that she no longer had the age or health for it. But she was happy, caressing her belly, saying that God had sent another companion for me. On that birthday, the presents came lighter. I think even my brothers were afraid of making noise and waking my mother, who had been feeling unwell at night. Still, they performed the ritual. 9 punches. I already knew exactly how to position myself so it would hurt less, how to protect the most sensitive parts of my body. In April of that year, my mother lost the baby. It was a terrible night with a lot of pain and blood, and my father had to call the midwife in a hurry. I remember waking up to the screams and seeing Eugene, pale, heating water on the stove as the midwife had requested. After that night, my mother was never the same. She became quieter, prayed more, smiled less. And I, who had always been her miracle, her only daughter, suddenly seemed to have become a painful reminder of what she had lost. Time went on, and each January brought its torment. 10 years, 10 punches. 11 years, 11 punches. The physical pain was terrible, but the question that wouldn't leave my mind was even worse. Why? Why did my own brothers hate me so much? When I turned 12, in 1965, the family dynamics had changed a bit. George had married a girl named Zena and moved to a nearby house. Oliver spent weeks away, working in more distant mines. Albert still worked at the store, but now he drank a lot and was always getting into fights. I thought perhaps the ritual had ended, that they had forgotten or given up. My mother, always trying to do the best with the little we had, prepared a cornbread cake with apple butter for my birthday. My father gave me a new notebook for school. It was an almost happy day, until night came. George showed up at our house after dinner. He smelled of whiskey, with that look I knew well. Oliver wasn't in town, but Albert was there, leaning against the wall, with a hand-rolled cigarette in the corner of his mouth. "You think we'd forget your special day, little princess?" George smiled, showing a missing front tooth. 12 years. You're becoming a young lady." The way he said, "young lady," gave me chills. There was something different in his tone, something that had never been there before. That night, they took me behind the chicken coop. 12 punches. I counted each one, as I always did, waiting for the end. But when it came to the last one, George held my chin firmly and said something that froze me inside. "Next year you'll be 13. You'll be a real young lady then. The presents will be different." The way he said this, the look he exchanged with Albert, made me understand that something worse than punches was coming. Something I couldn't even imagine, but that made my blood run cold. That night, I cried like I hadn't cried in years. It wasn't just for the physical pain, which I had learned to endure. It was for the fear of the unknown, of what might happen when I turned 13. It was that night, curled up in my bed, that I made a decision. I wouldn't be there for my next birthday. I didn't know how, I didn't know where to go, but I would run away from that house before January came again. The next day, with my body still aching, I went to school more determined than ever. During recess, I sought out my only friend, Irma, who lived in the lower part of town with her family. I told her everything, for the first time in my life, about the birthdays, about the punches, about the fear of what would come next. Irma went pale, her eyes wide. "Ethel, that's not normal. You need to tell your mother, your father." "They won't believe me," I replied, knowing it was true. "Or worse, they'll believe me and won't do anything. My father never stands up to my brothers." "Then tell Miss Eleanor," Irma insisted. "She likes you. She'll help you." I thought a lot about that. Would anyone believe me? Could anyone help me? Or would I just make everything worse, as George always threatened? The decision came when, 2 weeks after my birthday, George showed up at home drunk in the middle of the afternoon. My parents weren't there. My mother had gone to deliver some clothes she'd washed, and my father was at the mine. I was alone, sweeping the yard. "I was thinking, little princess," he said, staggering toward me. "Why wait until January? I think you're big enough already." The panic I felt at that moment was different from anything I'd ever experienced. I dropped the broom and ran. I ran like I'd never run in my life, rushing down the hill, not looking back, not thinking about where I was going. I ended up at the school door, breathless, trembling from head to toe. The afternoon classes had already started. I ran in and went straight to Miss Eleanor's classroom, interrupting her lesson. I must have looked terrible because she immediately dismissed the students to the yard and made me sit down. "What happened, Ethel?" she asked, offering me water. And there, between sobs and tremors, I told her everything. About the birthdays since I was 6 years old, about the punches, one for each year, about the threats, and about what had just happened, the fear I felt seeing George approach with those intentions in his eyes. Miss Eleanor listened in silence, her face growing more serious with each word I spoke. When I finished, She held my hands in hers and said something I'll never forget. "You are not going back to that house today. Not tomorrow either. I'm going to take care of this, Ethel. Trust me." And that's how, on that sunny February afternoon in 1965, my life began to change. The fear was still there, pulsing in every vein of my body. But for the first time, there was also a thread of hope. Someone had heard me. Someone had believed me. I didn't know what Miss Eleanor would do, or how she could help me. I just knew that at that moment, as she hugged me in the empty classroom, I felt that maybe, just maybe, next January didn't have to be a month of terror. That afternoon, Miss Eleanor took me to her own home, a small but tidy 2-story house in the center of town. She had lived alone since her husband had passed away years before. On the way, we stopped at the police station, where she insisted I tell everything again to Sergeant Miller. I was trembling so much I could barely speak. The sergeant, a man with a thick mustache and furrowed eyebrows, listened without saying much, just making notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he looked at the teacher and said something I didn't quite understand about family matters and "we can't get involved like this." Miss Eleanor turned red with anger. I had never seen such a calm lady lose her composure like that. She banged on the table and said, "If you won't do anything, I will do it myself. And when this girl turns up dead, it will weigh on your conscience." We left the police station without much hope of help from the authorities. At Miss Eleanor's house, she gave me a warm bath, clean clothes, and a plate of food. It was the first time in a long time that I felt safe. "You're going to stay here for a few days," she said. "I'm going to talk to your parents and explain the situation. They need to know what's happening." Fear returned like a wave. "No, Miss Eleanor, they won't believe me. And my brothers will find out. They'll say I lied. She held my hands. "Ethel, look at me. You didn't do anything wrong." "Nothing. They are the ones who are wrong, and your parents need to protect you. It's their obligation." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining George and the others finding out I had spoken, what they would do to me afterward. Miss Eleanor must have noticed my distress, because she sat on the edge of the bed and stroked my hair until I fell asleep. The next day I was still at her house when someone pounded on the door. It was my father, Theodore, with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of anger, shame, and confusion. "Is it true what they're saying, Ethel?" He didn't even greet me. He went straight to the point. "That your brothers beat you on your birthday?" I looked at Miss Eleanor, who gave a small nod of encouragement. With a trembling voice, I replied, "It's true, Dad. Since I turned 6, 1 punch for each year." My father rubbed his face, as if suddenly very tired. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "They said it would be worse if I told—" The teacher intervened, explaining that it was common for abuse victims to stay silent out of fear. She also told him about George's recent threat, the one that made me run to the school. My father listened to everything in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. When she finished, he simply said, "Let's go home, Ethel." I looked in panic at the teacher, who quickly said, "I don't think it's safe for her to go home now, Mr. Johnson, at least until we're sure that—" "They're not there," my father interrupted. "I sent George back to his house. Albert went to work. Eugene and Gerald are with your mother. No one is going to touch a hair on her head." Reluctantly, I followed my father back home. The path never seemed so long. When we arrived, my mother was sitting at the door, her eyes red from crying. Seeing me, she ran and hugged me tightly, sobbing, "My daughter, forgive me. Forgive me for not seeing." That night was strange. A heavy silence hung over the house. My parents talked in low voices in their room. Eugene and Gerald looked at me differently, a mixture of guilt and relief. The next morning, I woke up to shouting. George had returned and was having a terrible argument with my father in the yard. "You're going to believe a lying kid?" he shouted. "All of this is her invention. She wants attention, wants to play the victim." "I saw the bruises, George," my father replied, his voice firmer than I had ever heard. Every year, after her birthday. I saw them and didn't want to believe. I preferred to think they were from falls, from fights with other children. And they were. That girl is always getting into trouble. Enough! My father's shout even startled the chickens. You will not set foot in this house again. Not you, not Oliver, not Albert, it's over. I stood frozen behind the door, hardly believing what I was hearing. My father, always so quiet, so submissive in many ways, was finally taking a stand. George let out a bitter laugh. You think you can stop me? This house was my grandfather's. I have more right to it than that little bastard you brought here. There was a sound of a fight, and I ran to the window. My father and George were wrestling in the yard, rolling in the dust. My mother screamed for them to stop. Eugene tried to separate them. That's when I saw Albert arriving, staggering from drink even at that early hour. Seeing the fight, he didn't hesitate to join in, pulling my father by the hair, pulling him away from George. The two brothers began to beat my father, who was already down on the ground. Stop! Please, stop! I screamed from the window, desperate. That's when Eugene did something I never imagined. He picked up a piece of wood and hit Albert in the back, making him fall. Enough! Isn't what you did to her enough? Are you going to kill our father too? Gerald, who until then had been watching, paralyzed, ran to help, pulling George away. For a moment, everyone stood breathless, staring at each other. George spat on the ground and pointed at me in the window. This isn't over, little princess. You're going to pay for opening that mouth. They left, leaving my father injured in the yard. That day marked the beginning of an even more difficult period. My older brothers no longer lived with us, but the threat hung in the air. I could no longer go to school alone. Eugene began to accompany me every day, there and back. At home, my parents argued a lot. I heard my mother saying we should move away from Kentucky, start over somewhere else. My father resisted, saying he wouldn't be driven from his own home by his sons. The weeks went by, and the tension only increased. George was fired from the mine for showing up drunk at work, and he blamed my father for it. Rumors began to circulate in town about our family. Some people looked at me with pity, others with suspicion, as if I had made it all up. Miss Eleanor continued to be my safe harbor. At school, she gave me special attention, always asking how I was, if anything else had happened. It was she who noticed, before anyone else, that I was withering away with the whole situation. I wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping, was startled by any noise. You need to get out of here, Ethel, she told me one day after class. This town is too small, people forget quickly, but they don't forgive. And your brothers, I'm afraid of what they might do. My 13th birthday was approaching, and with it, the terror returned in full force. Despite my father's promises, I didn't feel safe. George had made specific threats about when I turned 13, and I knew he hadn't given up. One night, about 2 weeks before my birthday, I woke up to a strong smell of smoke. Our straw roof was on fire. My father was shouting for us to run out while trying to put out the fire with buckets of water. Neighbors came to help, forming a chain to bring water from the well. They managed to control the flames, but part of the roof and the back wall was destroyed. As we looked at the ruins of our house, Sergeant Miller appeared. Someone threw kerosene and set it on fire, he said, examining the remains. Any idea who it might have been, Theodore? My father looked at me, then at the police officer. I'm sure it was just a coincidence. Maybe a spark from the stove. I knew it wasn't a coincidence. We all knew. It was a warning. And that's when my father finally understood that we couldn't stay in Kentucky anymore. 3 days later, with only what we could carry in 2 bundles, we boarded the train to Cincinnati. Miss Eleanor accompanied us to the station. In her farewell, she gave me a new notebook and a pencil. Write, she said. Write what you feel, what you think, what you dream. Don't let them take that away from you. She also handed an envelope to my mother. My cousin Nancy lives in Cincinnati. This is her address. She can help you get settled there." The train departed, leaving behind the only town I had ever known. I watched from the window until Kentucky disappeared around the bend with its colonial houses and stone streets. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. It had been my home, despite everything. There were my few good memories, the smell of my mother's cornbread, the stories she told at night, the occasional affection from my father. But there were also the birthdays of terror, the punches counted one by one, the constant fear, the threats. And now, the certainty that we would never be safe in that place again. In the noisy train car, I rested my head on my mother's shoulder and cried silently. I didn't know what awaited us in Cincinnati. I didn't know if my brothers would find us there. I didn't know if I would ever be free of the fear they had planted in me. The only certainty I had was that for the first time, my parents were on my side, that they had finally believed me. And that maybe, just maybe, my next birthday wouldn't bring punches and humiliation, but rather the chance for a new beginning. The train moved forward on the tracks, rattling between the mountains of Kentucky, taking us into the unknown. I had just turned 13 when we left Kentucky behind in January 1966. A new chapter was beginning, written with the ink of fear, but also of hope. Cincinnati was a completely different world from my small Kentucky town. Tall buildings, wide avenues, so many cars and people that I got dizzy just looking. In the first few days, we stayed at Nancy's house, Miss Eleanor's cousin. She lived in a small apartment in the North Side neighborhood, worked as a nurse at the hospital, and had no children. Nancy welcomed us with open arms, but the space was tight for all of us. My father soon found work as a construction laborer. The salary was small, but enough to rent a 2-room shack in a shanty town in the northern part of the city. It was humble, but at least it was ours, and it was far from Kentucky. I should have been relieved to be away from my brothers, but the fear didn't leave me. At night, I had terrible nightmares. I dreamed that George found me, that he carried out his threats. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. My mother would come to calm me, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't sleeping well either. "What if they find out where we are?" I asked one night, after another nightmare. "Your father changed his name at work," she replied, stroking my hair. "Here we're the Smiths, not the Johnsons. Nobody will find us." But even that precaution couldn't reassure me. I became afraid to leave the house, to go to school, of any man who remotely resembled my brothers. I developed a nervous tic. I would blink my right eye uncontrollably when I got anxious, which was practically all the time. My father noticed I was withering away. One Sunday, he called me to sit in front of the shack where we had a view of the city below. "Ethel, you're safe now," he said, holding my trembling hands. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. I promise." "You couldn't protect me before," I replied with a frankness that surprised me. "How can you promise that now?" I saw the pain in his eyes. It was true. He had failed me. He had allowed it to happen for years, right under his nose. "You're right," he finally said. "I failed as a father. I didn't see what was happening, or maybe I didn't want to see. But I swear to you, by my mother's memory, that this will never happen again. They'll kill me before I let anyone touch you again." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the wounds were too deep. At the new school, I barely spoke. The other children thought I was weird, with my country accent and my frightened manner. The teachers complained that I didn't participate in class, even though I knew the answers. The truth is that I was afraid of drawing attention, of being noticed. I wanted to be invisible. My mother wasn't doing well either. The move, the stress, it was all too much for her already fragile health. She began to have serious respiratory problems, perhaps from the pollution of the big city. She coughed a lot, had shortness of breath. Nancy arranged for her to be seen at the hospital where she worked, but the doctors didn't give good news. It was advanced emphysema. With my mother sick, I started taking care of the house, even though I was only 13. I washed, cooked, cleaned. My father left before dawn and returned late at night, exhausted from heavy work. Life was hard, but at least there were no birthday presents. Or so I thought. On January 15th, 1967, I woke up with a start. It had been exactly 1 year since we left Kentucky. It was my 14th birthday. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't even want to remember. I made coffee as usual, helped my mother with her medications, and went to school. When I returned in the afternoon, I found our door broken down. Inside, a scene of destruction. Our few things were broken, torn, scattered on the floor. On the wall, written with charcoal, "Happy birthday, little princess." I fell to my knees, my entire body trembling in violent spasms. They had found us. Somehow they knew where we were. My mother was at a neighbor's house when it happened, thank God. When my father arrived and saw it, his face aged 10 years in an hour. He didn't say anything, just started cleaning up the mess, with mechanical movements, like a man in a trance. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the door of the shack with a kitchen knife in my hand, watching every shadow, every movement. The message was clear. No matter where we went, they would find us. There was no escape. It was the longest night of my life. Fear had transformed into something physical, a crushing weight on my chest that barely let me breathe. For the first time, I thought about ending it all, with the knife I held in my trembling hands. It would be so much easier. No more fear, no more nightmares, no more looking over my shoulder every minute. In the morning, when the first rays of sun began to illuminate the shanty town, my father found me still sitting there, clutching the knife, my eyes red from crying. "We're leaving today," he said simply. "Farther away, where they'll never find us." "It's no use," I replied, my voice hoarse. "They'll always find us. Always." My father knelt in front of me, his eyes bloodshot from also not sleeping. "Then we'll go so far that, even if they know where we are, they won't be able to reach us." That same day, my father quit his job, took what little money he had saved, and bought 3 bus tickets to the West. Not to just any city in the West, but to Seattle, Washington, as far as we could go with our resources. My mother barely had the strength for the journey, but we had no choice. We wrapped the few belongings that hadn't been destroyed and said goodbye to Nancy. She cried as she watched us leave and gave us what little money she had saved. "Take care," she said, hugging my mother carefully. "And right when you get there." The trip to Seattle was a 5-day nightmare. Cramped buses, bad roads, stops at dirty bus stations where we slept sitting up, taking turns to keep watch. My mother got worse on the way, her cough getting stronger, her breathing more difficult. I held her hand, feeling it becoming increasingly fragile. "Everything will be all right, Mom," I repeated, more to convince myself than her. "We're going to start over. Everything will be all right." She smiled weakly and squeezed my hand back, but her eyes had a farewell gleam that I only understood later. We arrived in Seattle on a rainy late afternoon, typical of the Pacific Northwest. The city was cool, humid, noisy, and full of people. We didn't know anyone, had nowhere to go. We spent the first night on a bench at the bus station, my mother lying with her head on my lap, my father sitting beside us, vigilant. The next day, with what little guidance we could get, we went to the port, where my father had heard he might find work. We waited in a corner while he looked for an opportunity. Hours later, he returned with news. He had gotten a job as a loader on a fishing boat that transported salmon and other seafood between Seattle and the islands. The boat owner, a man named Jack, offered us a place to stay, a small room in the back of a warehouse near Pike Place Market, the big market in the city. It was small and stuffy, but it was a roof, and the work, although heavy, paid enough for us to get by. But my mother wasn't well. The journey had been too much for her. 2 days after we arrived in Seattle, she couldn't get up anymore. Her breathing was so difficult that her lips turned blue. A doctor from the health clinic came to see her and shook his head. It was pneumonia, complicated by the emphysema. She needs a hospital, he said. Oxygen, antibiotics. We didn't have money for a hospital. My father begged Jack for help, who lent some, but it wasn't enough. We rushed to the public emergency room, but it was full. We waited for hours, my mother already unconscious in my arms. When we finally got care, it was too late. She died that night, without even having time to get to know the new city that was supposed to be our refuge. She died far from her land because of an escape she never asked for, from a problem that was never hers. At the funeral, it was just me, my father, and Jack, who kindly paid for the simplest coffin. There were no flowers, no priest, no words of comfort. Just the sound of the northwest rain falling on the red earth of the cemetery on the outskirts of Seattle. It was there, before that anonymous grave, that something broke inside me irreparably. It wasn't just the pain of loss, it was the certainty that all of this had happened because of me. If I hadn't been born, if I hadn't been the youngest, the only girl, my mother's miracle, she would still be alive in Kentucky, in the house she knew, among the people she loved. I returned to the little warehouse room like an empty shell. I didn't eat, didn't speak, barely slept. My father, destroyed by his own grief, could barely take care of himself, let alone me. He buried himself in work, leaving before dawn, returning late at night, increasingly haggard, thinner, more distant. One night, after weeks in this ghost-like existence, I had a dream about my mother. She was as I remembered her before the illness, strong, with that floral apron she always wore, her hair tied in a low bun. In the dream, she held my hands and said, "It wasn't your fault, my flower. None of this was your fault." I woke up crying, but it was a different cry, not of despair, but of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. That same morning, I got up early, tidied the small room, and when my father returned, there was hot food waiting for him. He looked at me surprised, as if seeing a ghost. Without saying anything, he sat at the makeshift table and ate. When he finished, he took my hands between his, rough and calloused, and said, "Thank you, daughter." They were the first words we had exchanged in weeks. A small beginning, a tiny light at the end of the darkest tunnel we had ever gone through. In the following months, little by little, we built a new routine. Jack, seeing my situation, offered me a simple job, cleaning the warehouse and organizing the merchandise. I accepted immediately. It wasn't much, but it gave me something to do, a purpose. In August 1967, 7 months after my mother's death, Jack called us for a conversation. His brother, who had a small business in Maplewood, Minnesota, needed help. He offered my father a better position than carrying weight at the port. "It's a small, quiet place," Jack explained. "Far from everything. Nobody will look for you there." My father looked at me, the silent question in his eyes. I nodded. I was tired of running, but maybe, just maybe, that small town in the land of 10,000 lakes would be far enough. A few weeks later, we boarded a bus headed to Maplewood. We left Seattle without looking back, with nothing to regret. We carried only our few clothes, the pain of our losses, and a fragile hope that, this time, we could really start over. As the bus cut through the mountains and plains, I watched the birds flying alongside, free, without fear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I too could one day fly like that. Maplewood was unlike any place I had ever known. A small town in Minnesota, surrounded by lakes, parks, and an exuberant nature that seemed endless. The simple houses, colorful, lined up on dirt streets, the slow rhythm, dictated by the seasons and the rains, the lakes that were the center of life in the summer. It was there, in that little piece of land surrounded by water on all sides, that we finally began to feel some security. Jack's brother was named David, a man of few words, but with a good heart. He had a small store that sold a little bit of everything, from flour and dried fish to medicine and fabrics. My father started working with him, and I helped when I wasn't in school. we managed to rent a small wooden house by one of the lakes with a porch from which you could see the most beautiful sunset I've ever witnessed. Little by little, we adapted to that new life. The cold, snowy winters, so different from Kentucky's mountains. The food based on fish and potatoes. The drawn-out accent of Minnesotans, which sometimes I could barely understand. At the local school, I was received with curiosity. I was the girl from outside, with a different way of speaking and dressing. But, unlike Cincinnati, here no one thought I was weird, just different, even interesting. I made some friends, especially Diana, daughter of the fisherman Howard, who lived near us. It was Diana who helped me learn the local customs, the northern legends, the secrets of the lakes. She taught me to row a canoe, to identify fish, to predict rain by the behavior of birds. She was a girl my age, but seemed to know everything about this world that was so new to me. "You don't talk much about your life before coming here," she said to me one day, while we were sitting by the lake, our feet in the warm water. "There's not much to tell," I lied, throwing a stone into the water. "My mother died, so we came here to start over." Diana looked at me with that penetrating way she had. "There's more to it, I know. But that's okay. You can tell me when you want to." The truth is that I still couldn't talk about the past. The fear was still there, even being so far away. I still had nightmares, still got startled by sudden noises, still looked over my shoulder when I walked down the street. And above all, I still carried that guilt, of having been the cause of my mother's death, of having dragged my father away from everything he knew. My father didn't talk much either. He continued to work hard, from sunrise to sunset, as if trying to fill with work the void my mother had left. At night, we would sit on the porch, each lost in our own thoughts, watching the lake. We rarely talked about the past, about Kentucky, about my brothers. It was as if we had made a silent pact to move forward, without looking back. Time went by. I turned 15, then 16, then 17. Each birthday still brought a twinge of anxiety, a shiver of fear. But as the years passed, I began to realize that I was safe, that we were too far away to be found, that maybe, finally, we could live in peace. In 1970, when I turned 17, I finished my studies at the small school in Maplewood. There was no way to continue studying there. I would have to go to Minneapolis. But the idea of returning to the big city gave me chills. Besides, we didn't have money for that. That's when David made a proposal that would change my life. "Ethel," he said one day, while I was organizing shelves in the store, "you have a knack for this. You're organized, honest. You know how to deal with customers. I'm thinking of expanding the business, opening a diner next door. I'd like you to manage it." I was speechless. No one had ever trusted me like that before. No one had ever given me such a big responsibility. "But I don't know anything about managing a business," I replied, insecure. "Nobody is born knowing," he laughed. "I'll teach you. You learn fast." My father, when he found out, was radiant. It was the first time I had seen him smile for real since my mother's death. "You deserve this, daughter. You deserve a chance." And so, at 17, I began my career as the manager of the small Maplewood diner. I worked hard, learned every detail of the business, won over the clientele with my attentive manner. The place began to gain fame in town, and soon we were serving not just snacks, but also complete meals with typical dishes of the region. It was at the diner that I met Robert, a teacher who had come from Duluth to teach at the local school. He would come for lunch every day, always ordered the same thing, fried walleye with wild rice and cornbread, and always left a generous tip. He was a quiet, polite man who read while he ate. One day, he offered me a book. "I noticed you like to read," he said shyly. "I thought you might like this." It was a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. I was moved by the gesture. No one besides Miss Eleanor had ever given me a book before. I thanked him and promised to return it as soon as I finished. "No need to return it," he smiled. "It's a gift." Our friendship grew slowly. We talked about books, about life in the town, about the dreams we had. Robert was 25, 7 years older than me, and had a maturity that attracted me. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but he had gentle eyes and hands that gestured elegantly when he talked about something that passionate him. At no point did he try to rush or pressure me. He respected my space, my silences, my fears that he didn't even know about yet. It was a gentleness I had never experienced coming from a man. My father liked him. "He's a serious young man," he would say. "He has a future." When I turned 19, Robert asked me to be his girlfriend, formally, asking my father's permission, as was customary. It was the first birthday I truly celebrated since I was 6. We had a small party at the diner, with blueberry pie and homemade root beer. David and his wife came, Diana and her parents too, some regular customers. It was simple, but to me, it meant the world. That day, as I blew out the candles, 19 of them, believe it, I felt as if I was finally breaking the curse, as if that ritual of blowing out candles and making a wish was replacing the horror ritual that my brothers had created. 6 months later, Robert asked me to marry him. He wanted to wait until I turned 20, but I asked that we not wait. I was afraid, an irrational fear perhaps, but real, that if we waited too long, something would happen to ruin everything. We got married in a simple ceremony at the small St. John's Lutheran Church in Maplewood. My dress was sewn by Mrs. Ingrid, the best seamstress in town. It wasn't white, but a soft shade of ivory, with lace that she made herself. Robert rented a small house near the school where he taught. It was small, but airy, with a yard where we planted a maple tree and a cherry tree from the start. My father didn't want to come live with us, despite the invitation. He said young married couples need space, but promised to visit often. The first months of marriage were a mixture of joy and fear. Joy for having found someone so gentle, so patient. Fear because the ghosts of the past still haunted me, especially in intimacy. Robert noticed when I tensed up, when panic took over me, and never forced anything. He waited for me to be ready, to trust him enough. Until one day, sitting in the swing on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake, I decided to tell him everything, from the beginning. The birthdays, the punches, the threats, the escape to Cincinnati, the invasion of the house, my mother's death. Everything we had gone through to get there. Robert listened in silence, holding my hands. When I finished, I saw that he was crying. Not out of pity, but out of indignation, out of anger for everything I had suffered. "Never again," he said, hugging me tight. "Never again will anyone hurt you like that. I promise." This time, I believed the promise, because it wasn't made by someone who had failed me before, but by someone who had proven, day after day, that he deserved my trust. In the years that followed, we built our life together. I continued working at the diner, which had now become a respected restaurant in Maplewood. Robert was promoted to school principal. We bought a bigger house, closer to the center of town. In 1975, at 22, I had our first child, Theodore, named in honor of my father. 2 years later came Cecilia, our daughter, honoring my mother who never met her grandchildren. My father was a wonderful grandfather. He had with his grandchildren the patience and demonstration of affection that he hadn't always been able to have with me, perhaps because of his own harsh upbringing, perhaps because of the traumas we shared. Seeing him playing with the children, telling stories, teaching them to fish, healed something in me that I didn't even know was still wounded. In 1980, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was only 65, but hard work and the pains of life had aged his body before its time. In his last years, we lived in separate houses, but close by. He had retired from the store, but helped at the restaurant whenever he could. At the funeral, I realized how much respect he had earned in the community. The church was full. People from all over Maplewood came to say goodbye. Some didn't even know him personally, but knew he was Miss Ethel from the restaurant's father, and that was enough to deserve respect. It was a difficult loss, but different from my mother's. This time, I could say goodbye. I could thank him for everything he had done, for the sacrifices, for the courage to start over so many times. And above all, I could forgive him for not protecting me before, for taking so long to believe, to act. The week after the funeral, I received a letter. It came from Kentucky, sent by Miss Eleanor. My heart raced when I saw the envelope. We hadn't kept in touch. It was too risky. How had she found us after so many years? With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. The letter was short, written in the impeccable handwriting I remembered so well. Dear Ethel, I hope this letter finds you well, wherever you are. I have been looking for news of you for years, without success. Until, by a twist of fate, an acquaintance who visited Minnesota mentioned a restaurant in Maplewood, run by a woman from Kentucky. It couldn't be a coincidence. I write to tell you that you can return to Kentucky without fear. George died last year in a mine accident. Oliver has been in prison for years for other crimes. Albert disappeared. No one knows his whereabouts. As for Eugene and Gerald, both left town a long time ago. I know these news may mean nothing now, after so long, but I thought you would like to know that you are free, that the past can no longer reach you. I am old now, retired, but I still remember you fondly. The brave girl who had the strength to break the silence. I hope you have found the peace and happiness you deserve. With love, Eleanor. I read and reread the letter, sitting on the porch of my house, listening to the familiar sounds of the lake and the forest. A strange feeling came over me. It wasn't exactly relief, nor joy, nor sadness. It was as if a very long and painful chapter was finally coming to an end. I showed the letter to Robert that night. He hugged me and asked, "Do you want to go back? Visit Kentucky?" I thought for a moment. I visualized the stone streets, the old houses, the mountains that framed the town of my childhood. So many memories, some good, many bad. "No," I finally replied. "My place is here now, with you, with our children. This is my home." And it was true. Maplewood, this small town lost in Minnesota, had become the place where I finally found peace, where I rebuilt my life piece by piece, where I learned to trust again, to love, to not be afraid of my own birthdays. I replied to Miss Eleanor's letter, briefly telling her about my life, sending photos of my children, thanking her for everything she had done for me. It was the last time we communicated. She passed away a few years later, as I learned from another letter, this time from a niece of hers. And so, with my father's death and the news from Kentucky, I felt that a cycle was closing, that I could finally look forward without the constant weight of the past on my shoulders, that the ghosts, if they hadn't disappeared completely, had at least lost the power to terrorize me. At 27, for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. And so, the years went by, my dears. Today, at 72, I'm still here in Maplewood, this blessed town that welcomed me when I needed it most. The Maplewood Diner has become a reference in the region. People from Minneapolis, from other states, and even from other countries come to try our typical dishes. I don't work there as much as before. I left the management in the capable hands of my daughter, Cecilia, who inherited my knack for business. My Robert retired from teaching about 10 years ago, but he still gives private lessons to children who have difficulty in school. He has a special way with the little ones, a patience that only someone who loves what they do can have. We've been together for more than 50 years, and believe me, each day is better than the one before. We discovered together that true love isn't like in the romances, full of drama and suffering, but rather that which is built day by day, in small kindnesses, in respect, in understanding. Our house remains the same, although we've made some renovations over the years. The porch where I am now is my favorite place. From here I can see the lake, imposing and peaceful at the same time, carrying and bringing stories. The maple tree we planted when we got married is huge now, giving abundant shade that brings joy to the grandchildren. Ah, my grandchildren, there are 5 in all. Theodore gave us 3, Eliza, 23, who is studying medicine in Minneapolis, Jacob, 20, who works with his father in the Fishermen's Cooperative, and the little one, Marie, 15, who is the spitting image of my mother Cecilia. Sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of her, it's as if time had gone backward. Cecilia has 2 children, Hannah, 19, who has been helping me at the restaurant since she was 14 and has a talent for cooking like no one else. And Adam, 17, who is passionate about photography and is always recording family moments, the landscapes of the town, the faces of the older residents. My day-to-day is simple, but full of small joys. I wake up early, with the roosters crowing and the sound of the first boats on the lake. I make strong coffee, the way Robert likes it, and we sit on the porch to watch the day dawn. Then I take care of my garden, where I grow herbs for the restaurant, basil, cilantro, chives, bell peppers. The earth is good for me. It connects me with something greater, reminds me that life goes on, that after each winter comes a spring. 3 times a week, I go to the restaurant, not to really work, but to see how things are going, to talk with old customers who always ask about me, to teach some new recipe I invented. The other girls who work there call me Grandma Ethel, with such affection that it fills my heart. In the afternoon, when the heat or cold presses, I like to stay at home, doing my needlepoint in the rocking chair. It was late in life that I learned this art, after I truly retired. I started with simple pieces, small towels, napkins, and evolved to more elaborate work. Today, I make true pictures of thread and needle, portraying life in town, the northern legends, the animals of the region. I sell some pieces at the town fair. Others I keep as mementos, still others I give as gifts to special people. Twice a month, we have a ritual that we never give up, the family lunch. Everyone comes, my children, my grandchildren, sometimes even close friends whom I already consider family. The table is bountiful, with fresh fish, venison, wild rice, cornbread made the traditional Minnesota way. We talk, laugh, tell old and new stories. In these moments, I look around and feel such gratitude that it barely fits in my chest. I won't say there aren't difficult days. My body isn't the same anymore. My knees hurt when it's going to rain. My eyesight isn't as good as before. My memory sometimes fails for recent things, although the old memories remain too vivid. I have my medications for blood pressure, for cholesterol, for joint pain. Robert has his too, and we take care of each other with the dedication of those who know the value of what they've built. The past? It's still there, of course. There are scars that never completely disappear. Sometimes, on nights with strong storms, when the thunder shakes the house, I still feel that tightness in my chest, that primitive fear that I knew so early in life. I still have dreams, increasingly rare, thank God, in which I'm back in that yard in Kentucky, counting the punches, waiting for the end. But I've learned to live with these memories without letting them define who I am. They are just parts of my story, not the whole story. And what a long and rich story it has been, with so many twists and turns. I never went back to Kentucky, not out of fear, but because I didn't feel the need. My life is here, in the waters and forests of Minnesota, in my husband's smile, in my grandchildren's hugs, in the smell of pine that perfumes my house. As for my younger brothers, Eugene and Gerald, I received news from them many years later. Eugene wrote me a letter sent to the restaurant's address. To this day, I don't know how he discovered it. He asked for forgiveness for not having defended me, for having been an accomplice by silence. He told me he had become an evangelical pastor in a small town in Wisconsin, that he had a family, children. I replied to his letter with affection, without resentment. Forgiving was a long process, but necessary for my own peace. About Gerald, I learned through Eugene that he had moved to Oregon, married a woman of Scandinavian origin, and worked as a mechanic. We never communicated directly, but I sent messages through his brother saying that I was well, that I had found happiness. Each January when my birthday comes, I make a point of celebrating. It's my way of saying that I won, that I transformed that date of terror into a day of celebration. My family knows this and always has a special party. Nothing too big, but meaningful. On my 70th birthday in 2023, they made a beautiful surprise. They invited all the friends I had made over these years in Maplewood, organized a party in the town square with live music, typical food, decorations of regional flowers. I cried like a child seeing so many people gathered to celebrate not just my life, but my story of overcoming. That's what I want you to understand, my dears. No matter how hard the storm, it always passes. No matter how deep the darkness, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. My life is proof of this. From a terrified girl in Kentucky to a fulfilled lady in Minnesota, the path was long and difficult, but each step was worth it. Today, when I look in the mirror and see the white hair, the wrinkles around my eyes, the marks that time has left, I don't feel sadness. I feel pride. Pride in having survived, in having resisted, in having rebuilt my life as many times as necessary. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to prepare a fresh coffee. Robert is coming back from his lesson, and I like to welcome him with a steaming cup and a piece of that blueberry pie he loves so much. Life is made of these small moments of happiness, you know, and I've learned to savor each one of them as if it were the last. My dears who are listening to me now, I want to leave you with some words that come from the depths of my heart. This heart that has beaten in fear so many times, but that today beats in peace. If you're going through any situation of abuse, whether physical, emotional, or any other kind, the first thing you need to know is, it's not your fault. It never was, it never will be. The second thing I want you to know is, you're not alone. Even if it seems like there's no way out, even if the walls seem to be closing in around you, there are people willing to help. It might be a teacher, like my Eleanor was for me. It might be a neighbor, a friend, a professional. Seek that help, even if your voice shakes when you speak, even if the words seem stuck in your throat. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. When I left Kentucky on that train at 13, I had no idea what the future held. I just knew I needed to survive, one day at a time. And so I did, step by step, rebuilding my life like someone gathering the pieces of a broken vase and creating an even more beautiful mosaic. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror today, I don't just see an old lady with white hair. I see a warrior who faced her demons, some from her own family, and managed to win. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. There were moments, especially after my mother's death, when I thought I would never see daylight again, that the pain was too great to bear. But even there, at rock bottom, there was a small flame that refused to die. It's this flame that we all have inside us, the will to live, to move forward. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. My brothers could hurt me physically, but they couldn't break my spirit. This is a lesson I carry. No one can take your essence, your value as a human being, unless you allow it. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take any more. When I ran to the school that day, trembling with fear after George threatened me, I didn't know I had in me the strength to change my own story. But I did. And you do too, believe me. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I still carry the scars of those birthdays of terror, but I've learned not to let them define who I am. They are just parts of my story, not the whole story. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become a bitter person, distrustful, incapable of loving. But I chose another path. I chose to trust again, to love again, to rebuild again. And that choice made all the difference. In any country, in any culture, There are people going through what I went through. Abuse knows no borders, doesn't choose social class, doesn't distinguish color or religion. But what is also universal is the human capacity for overcoming, for healing, for transformation. If you're listening to this from a distant place, know that your suffering is understood, your pain is valid, and your healing is possible. If you know someone who is being abused, whether a child, a teenager, or an adult, don't close your eyes. Don't be like those who saw my bruises and preferred to believe my lies about falls and accidents. Extend your hand, offer help. Be the support that person needs to take the first step toward liberation. In every community, in every country, there are resources available for those who suffer abuse. Seek information about local protection organizations, about the laws that can support you, about professionals who can help you. The internet today connects us and gives us access to information that in my time was very difficult to obtain. Use this tool to your advantage. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in getting up every time. I fell many times along my journey. There were days when fear seemed greater than hope, when pain seemed greater than the possibility of joy. But I always found strength to get up one more time, to take one more step, to try again. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Today, when I see my family gathered, my grandchildren growing up happy and secure, I know that each tear shed, each night of fear, each painful new beginning was worth it. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. When I finally told Miss Eleanor what was happening, when I broke the silence that imprisoned me, I took the first step toward my liberation. Your voice has this power too. Use it. Age has given me the wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. I started from scratch so many times, in Cincinnati, in Seattle, in Maplewood, and each new beginning brought me learning, growth, new possibilities. Never think it's too late to seek a better life. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end in the painful chapters. The abuse I suffered was just a part of my life, not my whole life. After it came love, family, work that fulfilled me, true friendships, the small and large joys of everyday life. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each birthday I celebrate with joy, each moment of happiness I experience, each dream I fulfill is proof that I won. My tormentors couldn't destroy me, and yours won't be able to either. My dear friends, if you're suffering from family abuse like I did, you need to act now. Don't wait until the next blow, until the next humiliation, until it's too late. Seek help immediately. A trusted teacher, a school counselor, a religious leader, anyone who can intervene. If you know someone who is trapped in a cycle of family violence, share this story with that person right now. Show them there is a way out. There is hope. It is possible to start over. Silence protects only the abusers. Break that silence. Share your story in the comments. Create a support network for those who are still suffering. Your courage can save lives. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me, and together we can help others find their way to healing and peace. Because, my dears, what I never told anyone until today is that on the night they set fire to our house in Kentucky, George didn't just want to scare us. He had poured kerosene specifically in my bedroom, planning that I wouldn't have time to escape the flames. And that's something that will stay with me until my last breath.